The Democracy That Delivers podcast is brought to you today by the Anti-Corruption and Governance Center at CIPE. This is the podcast where we talk about corruption in its many forms. And now to your host.
Welcome, everybody, to the Democracy That Delivers podcast here at CIPE, the Center for the International Private Enterprise. My name is Frank Brown, and I'm the director of the Anti-Corruption and Governance Center. And I'm very happy to be introducing today a topic that's a very live one here at CIPE, one that we talk about a fair amount in a part of the world that my center, the Anti-Corruption and Governance Center, has been focused on intensely for the last year or so. Today, we're talking about Latin America. On June 9th, Chile confirmed its intention to join the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, otherwise known as EITI, and Chile became an implementing country, with the government affirming its commitment to start the process of adhering to the global standard for transparency of oil, gas, and mineral resources. This is of particular global importance as Chile is an important producer of copper and lithium. It has some of the world's largest reserves of these minerals. Demand for copper and lithium is expected to grow exponentially, given their importance for everyday devices and renewable energy technologies. Implementing the EITI's reporting framework and multi-stakeholder platform could enable Chile to strengthen public oversight over its mineral value chain, from licensing and contracts to how revenues are collected, managed, and distributed. Today, we're very fortunate to have as a co-host Catherine Gibson, who's my colleague here at CIPE in the Latin America and Caribbean section. She's been a senior program manager there for 4 years. And in addition to working on the green minerals issue with my center, the Anti-Corruption and Governance Center, she also focuses in on our constructive capital and corrosive capital programs here at CIPE. It's a real pleasure to have her with us. She brings a depth of knowledge that I certainly don't have, and she'll be introducing our special guest. Catherine?
Thanks for the introduction, Frank. I'm really glad to be here today. We are very pleased to have María Jaraquemada joining us today on the podcast to explain the impact of Chile's recent joining of the EITI and what it means for the country, what role her organization, Chile Transparente, will play in this process, and also she will shine some light on the potential private sector concerns, as well as how this new EITI membership could impact U.S.-China competition. So before we jump into that, allow me to introduce María. She is the Executive Director of Chile Transparente, the Chilean chapter of Transparency International. She has 15 years of professional experience linked to public policies related to anti-corruption, transparency, open government, and democratic strengthening. Before this position at Chile Transparente, she's also worked at the Transparency Council, the Ministry General Secretariat of the Presidency as a legislative advisor, Fundación Ciudadana Inteligente as Director of Research and Advocacy, Espacio Público as Director of Advocacy and Coordinator of the Anti-Corruption Observatory, and the Latin American Anti-Corruption Network. Additionally, she's been at International IDEA, where she supported the Chilean constituent process in democratic strengthening. She has her law degree from the Universidad Católica and a master's degree in fundamental rights from Universidad Carlos III in Madrid. So we are very pleased to have her on today. Thank you, María. So we'll just jump out right now with a starting question to get us in the conversation. What do you think the impact of Chile's recent joining of the EITI, and what role will Chile Transparente play in this process?
Thank you, Frank and Catherine, for inviting me to be part of this podcast. I think that Chile is one of the last countries in the neighbor to be joining EITI. So I think that in our perspective, in the perspective of Transparency International, it's a very good news because these are standards that have been applying in many countries for several years now. We know it's not a silver bullet or a magic wand that will disappear risk of corruption. But of course, there are proven standards that also are being improved in these last years. So we can have standardized information from the private sector and also from the state related to beneficial ownership of companies, contracts and procurement, how much taxes are paying each company, and what is the industry doing here in Chile, a very important industry, as Frank was saying. So, of course, we think it's a very good news. Colombia, Peru, Argentina, and Ecuador are also part of this initiative. So we think that it's very important to Chile also be part of this. We have some transparency in companies. We have transparency standards in public companies like Codelco, the main copper company in Chile. But of course, we can have this. I think that this is going to be like the minimum standard for private companies to publish information and to have, I think, more integrity standard in their activities. Chile Transparente, as part of TI, I think that can play a very important role because, as you know, this standard also demand that there is an active cooperation among the state, but also the private sector and civil society and communities. This role, like gluing all these different actors and promoting the cooperation among them, have been played in other countries by national chapters of Transparency International. So we think that at Chile Transparente, we already work with the private sector, we work with national companies in the mining sector. So we think that as a civil society organization, we can play an important role bringing together all these actors and also promoting the better standards, international standards, on transparency and integrity in the mining sector.
So, Maria, I had a question ready to go for you, but I wanted to make a slight detour and just ask you to clarify something for me and for the listeners as well. It's my understanding that EITI in countries where there's significant natural resources is the best, most effective mechanism for reducing corruption. And that's in part because it brings together the companies, the government, and civil society. But I wanted to clarify that with you so that the listeners, at least, and myself as well, could understand the significance of what happened on June 9th. Is that
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes, these are international standards on how to bring more transparency in the industry. So you have to accomplish with some minimum standards, but also you have to have some cooperation and some agreements on what more can you do among all these actors. So I think that that's a very good thing because usually you have like the private sector or the companies having conversations with the state and also with communities or civil society. But we are not all sitting in the same table speaking and agreeing on what standards do we have to accomplish to have more transparency, more accountability in a very important industry. So I think that that's a very good thing and a very good step for our country.
Okay, that makes sense. So, getting on to my main question, Chile obviously is in a part of the world with an incredibly rich concentration of lithium. It's called Latin America's lithium triangle. And it seems to me, and again, please correct me if this assumption is wrong, but that in Chile, embarking on this road, joining EITI, submitting to these standards, bringing together the three groups, civil society, business, and government, to adhere to the standards, that there's an opportunity here for Chile to improve the situation in the lithium triangle as a whole. And could you give a quick readout on that? Like what's the potential significance for this region?
Yes, I think that Chile it's been considered like a low corrupt country, a country with low levels of corruption internationally. It's considered like that. I think that if you ask people in the streets in Chile nationally, there is a higher perception of corruption, and currently there are some scandals on corruption being investigated. So I think that this gives us two big opportunities. One is to effectively lead the industry in the region and in the world. We have the natural resources, but we can lead also with our industry, but also to lead with public-private alliances and strengthen institutions to guarantee that the international and the national companies or investors that will try to develop this industry in Chile can cooperate in a good environment. We are leaders in the region on anti-corruption and in integrity policies, but I think that this gives us an opportunity to lead more. We were the leaders 10 years ago. We were the first country in Latin America, and we have lost that leadership to Uruguay, and we have a descent in the corruption perception index, and we have a stagnation these last 4 years. So I think that if we adopt these international standards, we can improve our perception nationally and also give the guarantee in a very complicated region with a lot of corruption. It's a violent region. It's a very unequal region. I think that we can lead the region not only in the lithium industry, but with the best standards and governance to guarantee to international and national investors that they can invest here in Chile, and we're going to have strong institutions and a strong industry.
We're pretty interested, we're the Center for International Private Enterprise. So we're pretty interested in what the private sector thinks about the initiatives that are coming up, about the projects that we support, and how it relates to democracy. So I wanted to get your opinion, Maria, on what you think the private sector's concerns are currently. The national government has a new lithium strategy. They're going to have a new level of involvement with lithium extraction in Chile. And so I wanted to see what is Chile Transparente's understanding of private sector concerns, and then also kind of how you think that could affect the adoption of EITI standards, as it's so necessary that private sector, civil society, and public sector come together to agree on all of these standards and policies that will be implemented.
Yes, I think that there's a little confusion here in Chile and also abroad about this national strategy. Our constitution establishes that the lithium is owned by the state because it's a strategical value. So what has been happening until now is that our state sort of rent the exploitation of the lithium conservation to some private companies, one national and international owned company, and another an international company for exploitation. And the national strategy is proposing that our state has a higher involvement in this exploitation and in this industry. So I think that the concerns of the private sector is what is the role of this sector in the future. The government has said that they are going to promote these private-public alliances, and in fact, the United States has said that they are very happy and eager to collaborate in this future strategy. But I can understand some worries of the private sector because, of course, there are some risks of creating more public-owned companies, state-owned companies, for example. There are corruption risks, of course. We've seen that in Chile and in other countries. So I think that this government or the future governments, they have to guarantee not only the private sector and international investors, but also citizens, that if the state is going to be involved in this exploitation or these alliances, that we have to manage the corruption risks, and we have to manage the risks of changing governments constantly every 4 years, and that there's going to be a stable policy about this, because you need to have a long-term view in this issue. You can have like every 4 years different strategies. So I think that that's a very important challenge our government and our state has, of course, that Chile, that we have as a country, and that the government need to address that so effectively some international and national companies can be part of this strategy. So I think that EITI standards are a very good chance to show that commitment with transparency, with accountability, with integrity, and that these commitments can address those risks in a way that our state guarantees all companies and citizens that we're going to address these concerns and these risks.
That's really interesting, Maria. Thank you. I have another question for you about more of the political processes and making sure that it stays a stable investment for investors, as you were saying, at the end of every 4-year political administration. And I wanted to know if the constitutional rewrite might affect any of the stability or any of the decisions being made right now.
It's difficult to say yet. They are still discussing some amendment proposals. But I really don't think that there's going to be an important change of how our institution or our regulations are related to mining. Of course, there can be some discussions related to the lithium, but I don't think that it's going to change the property. But perhaps the current political discussion about this national strategy is going to be addressed at the process. We don't know what is going to happen because we have a referendum at the end of the year where citizens will decide if we approve or reject this new proposal. But when you see some polls, there's a strong rejectal to the new proposal or to the new process. So that's what we don't know. But most probably the lithium is going to be still owned by the state, but perhaps the main sectors will try to guarantee that the private sector has also some involvement in this industry.
And Maria, if you don't mind, I had a quick follow-up to something you mentioned before, something you alluded to, and that is the political nature of this whole process. That's accentuated or amplified by the fact that the Constitution itself asserts, public ownership of those lithium deposits. So my question to you is, does the EITI mechanism and structure, does that help reduce that political influence and impact upon those lithium reserves? In other words, does it preserve sort of the market orientation of those reserves rather than they're being used as a internal political tool within Chile?
I don't think that EITI can change that because there are international standards that should be adaptable to any national context. But I think that it could be a very good opportunity to improve the conversation between the private sector, the communities, and also the state. And I think that it gives, because you have to have national plans and agreements and follow that agreements. So I think that it can help to have a more medium or long term view of the processes and to have like a more state view than government view of these processes because it's a state commitment, it's not a government commitment. So I think that that's very good for countries where you have presidential systems where you can change the government every 4 years in very different ways. So you can give more stability to some processes like this that I think that it's very important to have more stability than changes that we are a region that are characterized by a lot of changes. So I think that we can give more stability to these processes.
I'm going to change the course of the direction just a little bit, Maria. But as Frank mentioned earlier, I'm in charge of all of our corrosive capital and constructive capital projects, which really have to do with investments that come from authoritarian countries into democratic countries. And it kind of focuses on the effects of those investments and how it affects democratic institutions. So with that in mind, I've been thinking a lot about how China and the United States are both extremely interested in lithium reserves and in all rare mineral reserves. So In the United States, we've seen that the Inflation Reduction Act contains several provisions to open up more critical mineral mines and also to help secure the United States domestic supply chain. And then we've also noted that China is extremely interested in rare minerals and then also in creating the plants and the manufacturing capacity to be able to create more batteries. And I wanted to know, how do you think Chileans see this potential world powers competition in an industry that's at the heart or could be at the heart of the Chilean economy?
I think that our international affairs system is very strong, and that we try to not be part of this like competition. But also, I think that we are very aware that this industry has a lot of risks. So we also are aware as Chile Transparente that we need to strengthen some of our institutions. For example, the investment screening regulations and institutions, and also international cooperation, because we need to avoid possible transnational corruption and corrosive capital flows into our country. As I said before, we are in a region that is very complicated, where organized crime is on a rise, and it's a transnational movement now. It's not something that is happening only in some countries. It's happening in a lot of countries. I think that we have to be aware that these opportunities also have some important risks, and we have to address them. Uh, we cannot think about opening this new market to international companies or countries if we don't strengthen our institutions. And I think that that's our main challenge related to this issue.
Thanks, Maria. I had another question that picks up on something you mentioned. I think there's a sense, at least on my part, that it's easy to see EITI and Chile's recent commitment to adhering to that framework and those standards. It's easy to see that as a way to prevent the kind of gross human rights abuses that we often see in resource-rich countries, and the unfair distribution of natural resources. It's easy to see EITI as protecting Chile from that in such a strong way that maybe we don't have to pay as much attention to that issue. And I wanted to get a sense from your point of view as somebody who's one of the leading voices within Chile on transparency, anti-corruption. How do you see this? Are we safe? Are we out of the woods? Can we sort of relax and look elsewhere?
I think that these standards help to have more transparency and accountability, but I think that the international community can and should do more. For example, we have also the Open Government Partnership, where the pillars of this initiative are transparency, accountability, and civic engagement. And you see countries like Mexico that are spying those who defend human rights or who are anti-corruption defenders. Guatemala, who's prosecuting and investigating journalists and also anti-corruption defenders that are part of those initiatives. And you say, how can they be part still of those initiatives if they are like acting against those pillars? So I think that they are not like the necessary safeguard that we should have. I think that those countries that have problems with human rights violations, or that are having problems with the democracies, for example, they also should be sanctioned or at least suspended of these initiatives, because if not, it's very contradictory that you are saying that you are promoting the most basic principles of a democracy: human rights, freedom of expression, transparency, accountability, and you are part of those initiatives, but you are really don't doing that locally or in-house. So I think that the international community should be a lot more demanding of these accomplishments to be part of these standards.
Well, we can definitely see the international community sees this as a tremendous opportunity for Chile to join EITI, especially with the assurances of responsible stewardship of the country's lithium reserves, as lithium is becoming such an important rare earth mineral that needs to be developed for continued green technology implementation. So I wanted to ask you, how do you view this opportunity for Chile as the head of Chile Transparente?
I think this is a very big opportunity for us to give important signals to the international market, to the international companies, but also signals locally to the Chileans. Because, as I said before, we are having some corruption scandals that are impacting the government, are impacting regional governments also. So I think it's a very important sign to say, okay, we want to be part of this club. We want to be part, as some other neighbors of us are part, and also some developed countries. So we want to be part of these international standards that guarantee at least some transparency and accountability in a very important sector. And if we want to be the leaders in exporting lithium, we should be also the leaders in exporting lithium in a transparent and accountability way. So I think it's a very big opportunity for our country. And we in Chile Transparente are very happy and eager to promote this and to be the leaders also in the civil society, so we can adopt the best standards in these issues.
Maria, that's a wonderful way to end this podcast. And I can't thank you enough for joining us. This is one of the most important lines of work that we work here on at SIPE, including at the Anti-Corruption and Governance Center, where I'm the director, and with Catherine Gibson, Senior Program Manager from our Latin America team, who is in the forefront of the work on green minerals at SIPE. So thank you both so much for joining. I think this is a theme we'll be coming back to in the future, and we may even come back talking about it in Chile. Chile produced 26% of the world's lithium supply in 2021. You get a sense of how vital your country is and how significant your recent decision to adhere to the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative is. So thanks to everybody for joining us. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Maria, for being on, and look forward to next time.
Listen and subscribe to SIPE's Democracy That Delivers wherever you get your podcasts.